We're working with excerpts from Artificial Fluency, and let me tell you, it's got some seriously mind-bending ideas about how language really works, especially when we start thinking about it as this social tool, not just something like stuck in our heads.
It really is easy to take language for granted. We use it so naturally.
Lovely.
But then you really start digging into like the mechanics of it all, the origins.
Yeah.
You realize, wow, this is something much bigger than just us.
That's what I found so fascinating about this paper, too. It compares languages to hyperobjects, which I'll admit sounded intimidating at first. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Sure. Imagine, like, these entities. They're so vast, so complex.
Yeah.
They just completely defy the way we typically try to understand things.
Okay.
Things like global warming or internet, or these massive systems. Those are hyperobjects. And the paper's arguing that languages actually fit this description, too.
This is already making me think about those late-night Wikipedia spirals I get into, clicking from one link to the next, and you're like, wow, I really don't know anything.
It's that feeling you get, right?
Yeah.
Of encountering something that stretches so far across time and space that we can't fully grasp it. And languages are like that, evolving over generations, across continents. And there's no single person who controls it all or even fully understands the entire system.
So it's less about, I don't know, individual words and more about how those words connect to this much larger, constantly shifting network of meaning.
Precisely. And that's a key characteristic of a hyperobject. It's not just big. It's this interconnected web, constantly evolving in ways we can only partially perceive.
Okay.
Think about how a word like, say, cool meant something totally different in the 1950s than it does today.
That's such a good example. It's the same word, but the meaning has just completely shifted because of how we as a culture are using it.
And that constant evolution, that dependence on a whole network of users, it really highlights how when we use language, we're tapping into something way bigger than ourselves. We're all part of this massive collaborative project that's constantly in flux.
That is a really powerful way to think about it. It's almost humbling, in a way, to realize how much bigger this all is.
Yeah.
And speaking of big ideas, the paper also digs into that classic nature versus nurture debate, but with a fascinating twist. It talks about this thing called the phenotype first model. Have you heard of this?
Yeah. The phenotype first model, it really challenges that traditional nature versus nurture view.
Okay.
The research suggests that cultural inventions, things like language, can actually drive biological evolution.
It's not just nature and nurture, but what comes first.
Yeah, exactly.
We're actually shaping our biology through the things we create.
In a way, yeah. One example that they give is how humans probably developed complex communication, maybe using gestures or early forms of symbolism, way before our genes were fully evolved to support spoken language as we know it.
Oh, wow. So we were essentially hacking communication with whatever tools we had.
Exactly.
And our biology was like playing catch up.
Exactly. Picture early humans,
Yeah.
driven by that need to communicate more effectively. So they developed these rudimentary languages, and over time, this cultural innovation, this constant use of symbolic communication, could have actually influenced our biology, leading to those genetic changes that further supported language development.
That's mind-blowing. It really flips the script on how we typically think about the relationship between culture and biology.
Cool.
So we've got languages as these vast hyperobjects. We've got culture shaping biology.
Yeah.
This is already a lot to process.
It is.
And it doesn't stop there, right? This paper then gets into what it calls the 6 dimensions of symbolic fluency. And these dimensions offer like a really fascinating framework for understanding how we become fluent in using symbols, which is essentially what language is all about. Okay, I'm ready. Let's break down these dimensions. What have we got?
So the first dimension is receptive,
Okay.
which is basically our ability to understand and then adopt existing conventions.
Got it.
Think about a child learning their first words, right?
Yeah.
They're observing, they're listening, and they start to grasp the meaning that we've attached to those sounds.
It's like they're cracking a code, figuring out all the rules of the game just by watching and listening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that receptive ability, it forms the foundation for that second dimension, which is constructive.
Okay.
And this is our power to not just use those existing symbols, but to create new ones,
Yeah.
to imbue things with meaning that might have been totally arbitrary before.
And this is where things get really interesting because it's not just about learning a fixed set of rules.
Right.
It's about having the flexibility to make new ones as we go.
Right.
It's like how every generation invents their own slang.
Exactly.
We're constantly building on what came before us, creating new meanings, new ways of using language.
Precisely. That creative capacity is essential for language's dynamic nature. But it's not just about inventing new words in isolation. The third dimension, the embedded dimension, that
Hmm.
emphasizes how meaning always hinges on context,
Okay.
on the system of symbols we're using at that given time.
Can you give an example of that?
Yeah, so think about the word run.
Okay.
You can run a marathon, right?
Yeah.
You
Yep.
can run a business, you can run for office. The meaning of run shifts so dramatically depending on those surrounding words and our shared understanding of how they all kind of work together.
So context is key.
Yes.
We're not just decoding individual words in a vacuum. We're interpreting them in relation to everything else that's going on around them.
Exactly. And that ties directly into that next dimension.
Yeah.
Malleable. Language isn't static, right?
Mm.
It's constantly adapting, meanings morphing and shifting over time to accommodate new situations, new technologies, new ideas.
This reminds me so much of how much technology has impacted language too. A mouse used to be a rodent,
Right.
and now it's also this thing I'm using to navigate my computer.
Yeah.
The word itself hasn't changed,
Right.
but its meaning has drastically expanded just to keep up with how we live.
And what's so fascinating is that we just adapt so effortlessly.
We do, yeah.
We see these shifts in meaning, these new ways of using language, and we almost instinctively grasp what's going on.
Which makes me think about that next dimension, meaningful.
Yeah.
We
Yep.
don't just blindly accept these changes, do we? We're constantly trying to make sense of them, to connect them to our existing knowledge and understanding of the world.
Absolutely. Meaningful emphasizes how human language isn't just about following a set of rules. It's about connecting those symbols to concepts, to reasoning, to our lived experience.
Yeah,
We don't just use language, we think with it.
totally.
We use it to make sense of the world and then communicate those thoughts and ideas to other people.
So it's like we're not just robots, like spitting out pre-programmed phrases. There's
Right.
there's a deeper understanding that's happening. We're using language to actually build bridges between our minds.
Exactly. And that brings us to that final dimension, graded. Symbolic fluency. It isn't an all-or-nothing deal.
Okay.
We develop these abilities gradually. We become more sophisticated in how we use and understand symbols over time.
So it's a spectrum, not a binary.
Precisely.
Yeah.
A child using simple words, they're demonstrating symbolic fluency. Even if they aren't crafting metaphors or debating philosophy yet, we all exist on this spectrum, constantly learning, adapting, and refining our symbolic abilities.
That's actually quite reassuring to hear. It means we're all works in progress, constantly evolving in how we use language.
And that's such a crucial point because this framework, these 6 dimensions, they highlight how language is this dynamic, collaborative process, something we build together
Yeah.
over time through countless interactions with each other.
It's definitely making me think about language in a whole new light. It's so much more alive and interactive than I ever really realized.
Yeah.
And what's really exciting is how this understanding of human language as this social thing, it's now shaping cutting-edge AI development. Because if we want to create truly intelligent machines, they need to grasp this social collaborative essence of how we communicate.
Exactly. And that's where those 2 AI systems discussed in the paper come in. Socratic AI and the multidisciplinary collaboration framework. They're really trying to make AI more conversational,
Okay.
to move it beyond simply responding to a command
Yeah.
and towards something that more closely resembles how humans actually interact and learn from each other.
How do these systems actually work? I have to admit, the idea of AI engaging in a Socratic dialogue, it's pretty intriguing.
It's really interesting. So imagine like 3 AI agents,
Okay.
each with their own strengths, their own perspectives,
Yeah.
and they're engaging in a dialogue.
Yeah.
So one might pose a question, another might offer up a hypothesis, and then the third might challenge assumptions or highlight like flaws in their logic.
Okay.
They're essentially learning from each other through this debate, through this discussion,
Yeah.
just like students in a classroom might.
Wow. So instead of being programmed with all the answers, they're actually like figuring things out on the fly,
Right.
bouncing ideas off each other, refining their understanding through that process.
Precisely. And what's really remarkable is that this type of interaction, at least according to the paper, it allows the AI to access and apply knowledge in a much more nuanced and creative way
Mm-hmm.
than if they were simply responding to pre-programmed prompts. They're starting to demonstrate some of those constructive and meaningful dimensions we were just talking about.
That's incredible. And what about this multidisciplinary collaboration framework? How does that one work?
So instead of having one general AI Imagine a team of AI specialists,
Okay,
each one with expertise in a very specific area, and they're all working together to solve this one problem.
got it.
So this framework tries to mimic that collaborative approach.
So, like how in medicine, you'd want a team of specialists with different perspectives to diagnose a complex medical issue.
Exactly. Each AI agent brings its own unique expertise to the table, analyzes the problem from its own specific angle, and then shares those findings with the group.
Okay.
And through that collaborative process, they can arrive at a much more comprehensive and accurate solution than any single agent could achieve on its own.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like they're pooling their knowledge and building on each other's insights, just like a human team would.
And that's a key takeaway here. Both Socratic AI and the MC framework, they demonstrate that we can't just replicate human behavior in AI.
Yeah.
We need to replicate the underlying principles of collective intelligence if we want to create truly intelligent machines.
Which, if we circle all the way back to the beginning, is exactly how human language itself works. It all comes back to that idea of language as this collaborative, evolving system that we're all a part of.
Absolutely. And it really makes you wonder if we can instill some of these same principles of collaboration and symbolic fluency in AI, what are the possibilities there? But also, what are the potential risks?
That's a great point, because with any powerful technology, there's always a flip side. And the paper touches on this idea of hive mind potential and peril, which I have to admit sounds a little ominous.
It is definitely something to consider. Think about online communities, particularly ones that are really focused on these creative endeavors. So artists, writers, musicians,
Yeah.
using platforms where they're constantly sharing, remixing, building upon each other's work at like warp speed.
Like those AI art communities that have just
Yeah.
exploded recently, people using AI to generate images and then sharing them online. And it's like inspiring others to create variations or build on those initial ideas.
Exactly.
It's amazing how quickly things evolve in those spaces.
Exactly. And these platforms, in a way, they're starting to resemble AI hive minds.
Interesting.
They're these collectives where human creativity and artificial intelligence are blurring, leading to these incredibly innovative and inspiring results.
But there are potential downsides too, right?
Right.
It's not all like sunshine and roses.
Precisely.
Yeah.
One concern is that as we become more and more reliant on these hive minds, the emphasis on speed and novelty
Yeah.
might overshadow the importance of meaning, of depth, of those qualities that really make human language so special. There's a risk of kind of prioritizing the output over the process,
Yeah.
the quantity of ideas over the quality of their expression.
Yeah, it's like we could end up in this world overflowing with information, but totally lacking any real substance or
Right.
meaning.
It's like a world where communication becomes more about just generating content than actually conveying something meaningful, something profound. And that's why I think understanding this social life of language,
Yeah.
this delicate dance between individual expression and then that collective meaning making,
Yeah.
that's more crucial now than ever
Totally.
because it's in that space between our minds. It's in that shared act of creation and interpretation that truly meaningful communication occurs.
So where do we go from here then? If language is this powerful technology, as much invented as it is innate, what does that even mean for how we should approach it?
It's a question worth sitting with for a while, right?
Yeah.
If we start to see language not as something fixed and immutable, but as this tool,
Yeah.
as this tool we can consciously shape and evolve,
Yeah.
it opens up all these really exciting possibilities.
It's if we're not just along for the ride, if we can actually steer this ship, where do we want to go? What
Yeah.
kind of conversations do we actually want to have?
Exactly.
What kind of future do we want to build with this incredibly powerful tool?
It really asks us to be more intentional, I think, not just about what we communicate, but how we communicate, right?
Yeah.
To really be mindful of the nuances of language, the power of context, the importance of actually cultivating genuine understanding between each other.
And maybe, just maybe, if we can approach language with that level of intentionality, we
Right.
can navigate those potential perils of these hive minds
Yeah.
while still harnessing their creative power.
It's a balancing act for sure, but I think a worthy one
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, language is about connection. It's about bridging those gaps between our minds, between our experiences, and then using that shared understanding to build a richer, more meaningful world.
Said.
Mm.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the social life of language, here's something I want everyone listening to think about. What if we treated language not just as this given, but as a skill to hone, a responsibility to share, and ultimately a force for positive change in the world?
The power to shape our collective reality really does, in part, rest on the words that we choose and the ways that we connect with each other.
It really does.
It's a pretty profound thought to leave you with.
It really